Aloha mai kako. Aloha. It's such a privilege, a sincere privilege to be on stage with these wonderful kanaka today. And here with all of you in the pavilion. I sort of grew up around here dancing hula, and so it feels a little odd to be actually talking on stage, but really grateful and happy to be here with all of you today. So, let's see. I'd like to first mahalo nui to CNHA and Kanaiokana for providing this space for all of us to be together and to have these important conversations here on Maui at such an important time. So mahalo nui for convening us, and to my fellow panelists for agreeing. Okay, I'm going to make this intro quick, and so we can get to the fun stuff. I'm going to start by giving you an idea of our format for the panel and set the ground rules before we dive into the reason we're all here, which is vai and these wonderful kanaka. So here's the plan. I will introduce our panelists. They'll chime in on specific questions, and then I will do my best to save some time for Q&A, for question and answers from you all. And I understand we're doing it through Slido, which is on the screen. Okay, it's on the screen through Slido. Almost, it'll come up. And so our Kanaiokana team will help to put that together so that we can compile the best questions, maybe put them together in order to maximize our time together here. And then finally, I know I don't have to say this, but I want to put this out there. Our panel will abide by Kapu aloha. This means that while we may not agree on certain things, we will always abide by aloha. And we recognize that that is twofold, right? We enjoy the pleasures of that aloha, but we also acknowledge that there are these burdens and to having those responsibilities. And so we may be tough on the issues and disagree a little bit, but we will always be easy on the people and respectful to one another in this conversation. So, anything to add at the outset from my panelists? No, okay. Okay. Okay, and if not, I will introduce my wonderful panelists. Like so many of you in the audience, these folks wear many hats, and so I'm going to do my best to give the two-sentence version, most appropriate for our time together today. So I'll start here with Uncle Keʻeaumoku, a me'e for me and so many others in our lahui. Uncle Keʻeaumoku has been a fearless champion for vai and aina for decades. A kupa of Maui and Kauaʻula, he is a cultural practitioner, a husband, a father. He is the po'o of Na'e Maui, kahu of Moku'ula and Mokuhinia, and we're so grateful to work with him in our capacity and the Native Hawaiian Rights Clinic on designation and water use permitting. So mahalo nui, Uncle. I'm going to skip around a little bit. So Jason Jeremiah, aloha Jason, okay. is the Director of Natural and Cultural Ecosystems at Kamehameha Schools, where he oversees the management of Keasa's aina across the Pai'aina. Prior to that, he worked at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and also worked with our communities here, just Mauka, in Nawai'eha, to protect our vai and our resources. Mahalo nui, Jason. And then all the way over there, who chose to sit the farthest away from me, is Jonathan Scheuer, born and raised on Oahu. Dr. Jonathan Likeke Scheuer helps clients manage environmental conflict, believing that there is always a pathway to shared sustainable prosperity for our communities and aina involved. He works closely with the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, is a lecturer at the William S. Richardson School of Law, and worked to protect aina at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. Mahalo nui for being with us, Jonathan. And here in the middle, he's bracing himself. A kupa of Hawaii Island, Kaleo is the Deputy Director of the State of Hawaii Commission on Water Resource Management. Prior to that, his career as a public servant began at the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. And among all those fancy titles, he is a hula practitioner, having completed his formal uniki rights in 2017 under Kumuhula Vicky Holt Takamine. But beyond that, he is a hardworking and one of the most humble kanaka and kupa'a servants, and so I'm so grateful for all you do. Mahalo, Kaleo. Okay, so the title of our panel is Olai Kawai, Ancestral Abundance, Current Challenges, and Future Forecasts. And so hopefully you all are in the right place, and if not, we won't be offended if you go to the next one, where there was some talk about trying to go to some other ones too. But in light of that title, I'm going to ask each of our panelists if you could sort of ground us in what that title means. Oh, you just got voluntold. If you could ground us in what that means to you, any of it, Olai Kawai, Ancestral Abundance, Current Challenges, and Future Forecasts.
Okay. Well, I guess I've been put in a spot. So, I just like to say that liquor is for drinking and water is for fighting. So, we may as well fight. But being involved in trying to be complacent in today's society, I've learned a lot. A long time it took us, especially dealing with the water use permit applications and all those kinds of things, understanding what pertinent rights are versus traditional customary rights. I mean, water is the biggest political icon in the state of Hawaii. And I really understand why. Because we've been tapped. We've been tapped out for our resources, all based upon the so-called theory of affordable homes. And it kind of puts us in our hard place sometimes as Kuleana when we're trying to gauge, our existence and how things would work. So when you talk about abundance in that resource, you kind of get stuck in this political regime on the actual percentage of water that we have, ground versus surface water. It took us a long time to really understand what that meant and how we as Kuleana gotta really assert ourselves when we start talking about the availability of water and whether or not we have any water that can help us when it comes to our traditional customary practices when it comes to our cultivation of kalo, the careship of our aina when we talk about the fauna and species that are dependent upon that as well, and also the business side, that there is kind of a catalyst on how you need to make sure that there's enough water that is abundant for everybody. But we as Kuleana are looked at kind of a little bit differently on the percentage of water, and that's why I think we've been able to understand when it comes to the Commission on Water Resource Management on what their duties are, and how for myself need to kind of go out there and be an advocate to other Kuleana landowners, especially when Kuleana feel that we already have the right when it was passed down to us genealogically from the time of the crown. What would happen? What was the Julio or the flip when we start talking about abundances of water for one purpose versus the other purpose? So all I gotta say is I'm not a geologist. I just some makainana, I just some kanaka, and I know the amount of water that I need. I know what I gotta be permitted for, and it's a hard thing to juggle when you gotta deal with the complacence of governmental rule. Yeah, so it's a sour pickle, is what I gotta say. That how we elevate ourselves as Kanaka, because we're kind of like the minority of all the majority of issues when it comes to water. So I've been able to learn how to have a lot of humility when it comes to that, because if no more humility, then crash and burn plenty times. And dealing with the conglomerates that I'm dealing with, That's why I say liquor is for drinking and water is for fighting. So I'm going to fight for whatever we need to for our future generations tomorrow. Mahalo.
Uncle Gonvalin told you pretty soon. He said you, Kaleo.
I'll jump in. Mahalo, Uncle. So I was thinking about, the panel, and you said, what does it mean to me? And so, you hear Ola ika vai a lot. It's actually my signature line on every email, on every letter that I send out. Partly just to institutionalize the concept that we live because of vai, right? That's the concept, the very basic foundation, right? And our kula kaiapuni keiki remind us so easily, ina ohe vai, ohe ola, right? It's very, very simple. And so hearing them today is just a reminder to all of us, right? That they're our generation, the next generation, that what we do today is going to affect them in the future. And I think about this concept of ancestral abundance, and even Kapu talked about it, where there's this picture that he paints about what that used to look like. But really what we need to think about is what do we want it to look like he talked about? Because back in the day, I guarantee you, they didn't think it was abundant. That's just how they lived, right? That's how they existed. They thrived and figured out solutions to their problems at that point in time in their history. And they created a system that worked within that natural order, right? And I think that's the issue that we're dealing with today. One of the current challenges is that we've designed and live in systems that go beyond our means. We live beyond our means, especially as it relates to vai. And so we owe it to the next generation really to question the systems that we live in and we operate in. As Uncle said, why is it that we have to go through this permitting process now? If these kuleana lands had water that were tied to it, how come we gotta go through this extra step? Well, it's the current system we're working in, and I found navigating it is also very challenging. But I do think, despite the system, we really need to start having conversations about what does our future look like? What does sustainability look like? What does Hawaii look like within the context of vai? And maybe we need to start to really look at that is changing every day, right? That the future of our water resources is unknown. Right now, this island is facing one of the longest, worst droughts it's ever seen. The hydrologists and geologists are seeing streams run dry. Upcountry, there's water shortage declarations. And so these are things that are going to continue to exist. But I think a lot of it is our built systems have really not looked at water as that kinolau of kane, something that is sacred, and there's something special about it. And so when we've, as Kaipo said, when we take source and make it a resource just for us, that's where some of the pilikia is, right? That's where we see some of our problems today. And so I think, we really need to start living within our means, come up with ways to develop new systems and ways to create equity in our built environment and in our communities moving forward. So I'll stop there. Mahalo.
Hallelujah.
Okay, aloha. I think when I think about the title, the abundance of the past and what we deal with today and going into the future, I kind of, I'm a guy that looks at old maps and land titles and historical documents, and we really got to read what the impressions of the old kamaaina of the time, the surveyors and other people. And I recall reading in Kahoma talking about o'opu fisheries being leased, back in the day. And so there was great abundance for it to be like economically driven, but that was the kind of the abundance that was there. And now today we don't see that, of course, right? And we have all these shortages of water, and all the science can tell us that, and so that abundance that was talked about That is what we is kind of like that vision or that rendering in our mind of what that will look like. Kaipo kind of talked about that during his talk right before this. But we got to see what we're trying to achieve, and that vision is in our mind. It's trying to put all of that information into our head to then, prioritize our actions to get us to a future that we want to see. Today we're faced with probably a landscape that is very hard to recover from what it once was. And in the future, I think I don't hear enough of the conservation community, which I work in, talk enough about like water supply in the actions they do up Mauka. And I think more of that narrative needs to come down of how we can't just think about the waters in our streams and our aquifers, but it's also the forest, all the way to the tops of our mountains, and how important that is. And those are long-term investments that I think we need to make more of. We do it because of our native species, we do it because of the health of our forests, but we also equally do it, I think, because of the supply water provides for us today and into the future. So, thanks.
Mahalo nui. Jonathan?
Aloha mai kākou. It's a real pleasure, not just to be here at this conference, but on this panel for people I consider both important colleagues and deep friends. So I want to talk mainly about what I think we need to do as a lahui right now at this moment in Vai, and why we need to do it, but I'm going to I might take a little bit longer than the first three gentlemen to talk about a little bit of history of Vai. And Kalamai, if this is something you know inside and out, but I find that a lot of people don't necessarily understand the particular legal history that we've lived through, that 150-year storm that Uncle Archie talked about. And so I want to talk about that first as sort of a grounding for what I think we need to do and why we need to do it. Of course, to start, in ancient Hawaii, of course, water was not privately owned, bought or sold, neither was land. Water itself was the kinolau, but was literally kane, right? The ali'i nui, and this is well documented in various ways, including some writings by Pukui in the 1940s. The ali'i nui held water, but not as their own personal property. They held it essentially as a trustee on behalf of the people. So water was held in trust. And when, during the depopulation of the kingdom and the incredible pressures that came to our people and our nation during the 1820s and 1830s and 1840s, and the tremendous and deliberate decision that was made to create certain private property rights in land, water specifically was exempted. So in the 1840 Constitution, Kamehameha III stipulates that he was the holder of the landed property, but not as his own personal property on behalf of the people. And in the 1850 Kuleana Act, there's the specific exemption, Section 7 of the Kuleana Act, that water shall remain free to all on all lands granted in fee simple. So the legal legacy of Vai in the kingdom was that it was not to be private property bought and sold by corporate or individual interests. But what happened with, of course, the rise of private property was that gave assurance to private capital to invest in sugar, then the ranches, and then pineapple plantations. And so there was a whole bunch of things with the rise of sugar that came out that devastated our landscapes. And I don't know how many people know, I learned about it only while doing research, that there was a very famous famine in Lahaina in 1867. So there was a famine in Lahaina, and actually this was after the capital had moved to Honolulu. And a committee of 5 experts were sent to Lahaina to investigate the causes. And Nakuokoa publishes some of the results of their things. They had 9 conclusions. I'm going to read 3 of them or 4 of them. First conclusion, the many sugar mills in Hawaii, there are 33. They do not farm, but instead they burn up the food of the kalo lands, such as at Honokohau, Halawa, Waipio, etc. 2, in Lahaina there were many lo'i and dryland sweet potato fields before, but in these days they have been turned over to planting cane. 3, there was plenty of water gotten by the people who farmed before, but in this time the water has all gone to the sugarcane, and the foreigners now are making great efforts in places formerly cultivated by people who planted taro, sweet potatoes, bananas, gourds, and such. And then I'll jump to the 9th conclusion. God is not the reason for this lack, right? Because sometimes when disasters come, people are like, oh, this is God's will, right? God is not the reason for this lack, nor is it because of a lack of rain. It is instead the lack of thought by men. Those of Lahaina are quick to judge. They think in that putting their land to sugar planting that they shall have pa'iai. So this is what the committee finds is the problem of the famine in Lahaina. Interestingly, 1867 is also the year supposedly that the very first major water rights case happens in Hawaii, just around the corner, just up here in Wailuku, where 2 sugar planters, Peck versus Bailey, start to sue over who has a right to use how much water in the Wailuku River. And this goes up to the Hawaii Supreme Court, and so this is like a little bit nerdy legal aside, but it's kind of interesting. It's decided supposedly by Hawaii Supreme Court Justice Elijah Allen in 1867. It's not reported until August 1893 in the Hawaii reports, the official note. And it just has this note like, decisions made previously not reported. So of course the assumption is they had to fish around, right, to find a precedent that was acceptable to the powers that now held the islands. And so they take this fight between two sugar planters and they say, you know what, it's okay to take vai from former kalo lands and to put it onto kula lands to grow cane. And it's okay to take vai from one ahupua'a and move it to another ahupua'a. And so this is the start of a series of legal decisions that comes down during the kingdom and then the so-called Republic of Hawaii and the territory of Hawaii that forgets about what that legal foundation that was laid, that vai is held in public trust, and instead starts to turn into water is private property that can be bought and sold. And so even if you read the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act in 1920, Section 221 of the Act, it's confusing because it says the department has the right to government-owned water and privately owned water. Now that doesn't make sense from our legal understanding now, but it's in the act because in 1920, when Kuhio was negotiating, that's what people thought, like, oh right, you can own water. And so it's a symptom, it's an emblem of how far we had gone. And so that oligarchic control not just extended to the landscapes, literally driving people to famine, it extended to the courtrooms of Hawaii, transforming our legal understanding of vai. And that continued through statehood until we finally had William S. Richardson, the namesake of our law school, native Hawaiian, who under his court fight from the other side of the archipelago on Kauai, 2 sugar planters again fighting over who owns how much water in the Hanapepe River, the McBride Plantation and the Gain Robinson Plantation. And so they are fighting and they go to circuit court and the circuit court judge says, okay, you guys own this much land in this area. McBride, you own this many gallons per day. Gain Robinson, you own this many gallons per day. State of Hawaii, you own some land in this area, you own this many gallons per day. And in the decision that they should have always regretted, they appealed it to the Hawaii Supreme Court. And the Hawaii Supreme Court looked back all the way back to the Mahele Act, to the Kuleana Act in 1850 and said, a'ole. Water never was privatized. It continued to be held by the government on behalf of the people. So that's in 1973. That leads to the changes at the 1978 CONCON, which reified, take this legal principle that water is held in trust, put it into the Constitution, echoing our custom and tradition, and call for the creation of the Water Code. As another aside, the awesome victories in the Constitutional Convention didn't just happen by chance. It happened after 2 years of community organizing by Alulike and others, identifying and cultivating Native Hawaiian candidates from around the Pai'aina who are going to get ready to run for CONCON and win in CONCON and be there to make changes. So in '78, we get the constitutional amendments, and then it takes 9 years to pass the Water Code. to implement these changes of water being a public trust and the government acting as the trustee. And there's a lot of compromises in the code. It's a really good code, but there's some compromises, including especially the difference between water in designated areas and undesignated areas. But we get there, but it's been a real struggle. It's been a real struggle since 1987 to successfully implement the code. Some good things have happened out of the legal struggles. We've had the courts clarify for us that there's 4 uses of water in addition to appurtenant rights that the government is always supposed to make sure gets provided for first. So water left in its natural state, water flowing Mauksumakai, whether in a stream or in the ground. During the plantation era, that was literally considered waste, which is just, from an ecological perspective and a cultural perspective, horrendous, right? If a stream was flowing to the sea, they considered it waste. The courts have said, no, that is a use of water. That is a productive use, and in fact, one of the highest uses of water. So water left in its natural state, water used in the exercise of the traditional and customary practices of Native Hawaiians, which of course includes things like growing kalo, but also includes things like ritual use, ceremonial use, and other uses of water to maintain entire landscapes like mokuhinia. Water, the use of water, the domestic needs of the general public is the third, and then water reserved for and used by the Department of Hawaiian Homelands is the fourth. So the good thing that came out of these court decisions was the courts made it clear, A, you're supposed to prioritize these uses before allowing for private commercial uses of water. But in the course of that, the State Water Commission, which was created, they got appealed 9 times to either the Intermediate Court of Appeals to the Hawaii Supreme Court, and they lost 7. So reminder, we fired Norm Chow with a much better record than that. Lost 7, won 2, and the 2 times they won were the only 2 times that they actually stood with local folks, Native Hawaiians, environmental interests over private commercial interests. So this is the struggle that we're in now, and why did this happen? I have a statistic of all the people who've served on the Water Commission, a database. There's been 50 since the Water Commission was created. Only 14, sorry, Wahine, only 14 have been women. Only 10 have been, by my reckoning, Native Hawaiian out of the 50. Only 1 has been a kalo farmer. Was Kamana Beamer was the first one. 16 served as former or current executives for large plantation or ranching interests, and there has never actually once been a year in the Water Commission where there hasn't been a single member of the Water Commission who has at least that background. So, and we saw very recently in the post-fire disaster capitalism in Lahaina how far some people are willing to go to push their agenda of continuing to fight against these public trust uses of water. So that's the historic background. So what do we need to do? The few things that we need to do is we need to really fight for this public trust, for these 3 or 4 of which are explicitly Native Hawaiian uses. We have to expand our activism. We also have to expand our representation, not just on the Water Commission, but on the county boards of water supply. For too long, the county boards of water supply have sort of said, well, it's up to the Water Commission to take care of these things, and we just deliver water. A'ole. We know, especially from the challenges of getting water to Hawaiian homelands, that the counties are critical partners. So we need to fight for public trust uses. We need to expand our role in it. But then also, why do we want to do it? And this will be the conclusion of my opening remarks. You know, there's a lot of people who say, well, hey, economically this makes sense, right? You want to have water now and into the future. You want to have businesses to have water. We should manage our water sustainably for economic uses. Yeah. In the face of climate change, and this has already come up today, yeah, you know, obviously if we have more water in streams, more water in the ground, that's a good thing to do it. A reason to manage our water well and protect public trust uses. But for me, those are not really the reasons why we do it. And Uncle Archie talked in terms of the importance of water today about wanting a guiding star. And the reason really we need to fight for water as a public trust is because it is actually based on the wisdom of our ancestors, on the traditions and customs of the people of this place. It is the current modern expression of those ancient principles. And if there's no other reason to fight for it, that's the reason. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui, Jonathan, for that really excellent historical context. And so much of it is so applicable to the conversation I think we're having here today as we navigate, these current challenges and importantly try and actualize and operationalize many of those important protections that we have in law. And so I want to transition to sort of current challenges that we've been facing over the past few years and especially months, especially as we think about solutions. And so top of mind for me is sort of this status quo and how what it means to really radically re-examine what status quo is and how we work back to a system of abundance. And so especially given the plantation systems and their successors that are still very much cemented in our streams today. And so I think a lot about equity issues, the issues of equity that so often show up in the media or even unconsciously in the decisions that we make. And so, Uncle, I wanted to ask you, given your role as a kupa of the place and in Maui Komohana in particular, you've been at the forefront, for better or for worse, of so many of these challenges around water and aina. Could you maybe talk a little bit about maybe some of those challenges around Hawaii in the past few weeks or months?
Yeah, maybe I'll take it a little bit further back than that. But I think what Jonathan basically explained, for me, that's why I'm totally confused of the whole process. But what was really upsetting to me was to know that Komohana, which is the west side, had only 23 to 25% of water for the residential community and public. Everything else was basically drawn for private use. 75% of that water was all the large property landowners that took full control of that. And I think that was the reason why a lot of the Kuleana kind of networked together with the help of Kahuliao to try to figure out whether or not we can go in front of the state to ask for, I guess first of all was the in-stream flow standard to make sure that we had water in our rivers, and to try to figure out whether or not that was, an amount that would sustain, all these valleys on the surface water. That was done. Then the combined effort of the community was to try to figure out whether or not we can get the state to designate the west side. That came a lot of resistance from a lot of the private landowners. And certain things that I've been kind of aware of, especially when the county level, when understanding that the private sectors in the county was kind of working in tandem on the resources of water, kind of made me upset. That we were basically given the opportunity to even be considered, especially as Kuleana, on any kind of amount of water that came from our resources for traditional customary purposes. So the biggest push for Komohana was to try to figure out, how do we get this total cap of water to be managed or monitored by the state agency. I think that was, first of all, their responsibility, knowing that Iao Valley was a management area, but Lahaina wasn't a management area. So if Lahaina wasn't a management area, then I felt that, for myself, we were kind of abandoned and left behind, because there is no other place that we could take our arguments if, we wanted to ask for more water or we had to go through some kind of process. But during that time, the state didn't take responsibilities of that management, so there was no place where our Kuleana could go to ask for some kind of assistance on how we would get the water. The water would basically, for us was to try to meet with West Maui Land Company to try to figure out whether or not they would give us additional water. That wasn't right, first of all, because now all of a sudden we're asking an alien that came to our lands that took full control of that water. Why do we all of a sudden have to be the one to ask them for water? So the only way that we could actually push the envelope to make sure that we were complacent in these rules that was made is to try to figure out ways on how, first of all, put the in-stream flow standard back by putting water back in the streams. Once that was done, to figure out, okay, whether or not that makes a difference on how the water should saturate so we can get a mauka to maikai flow. All these kinds of things I had to learn just to figure out how we can be more, not just serving the community, but serving just the natural habitat of where we live. Then once the in-stream flow standard was set, Olowalu was 2 million, Ukumihame 2 million, Launiopoko 300 and something gallons of water came from Launiopoko. Then Kauaula was 3.34 million gallons of water that they needed to return to the stream. But still today, the hardship for us is the private conglomerates never, ever owned up to whatever the condition was that was set by the state. So we're waiting. We're still waiting for clarity on where we're going to get that appurtenant rights to our water so we can gauge ourselves on the use of water. Not until the state put in the state management area. Not until that one happened, which came across a lot of resistance. These are the kind of things that are picking up slowly every time. And what we needed to do to be complacent at the same time, what the state's fiduciary duties are responsible for was for the management of our resources. All these kinds of little things that's coming to me left and right on whether or not we're doing the process the way it should be done. At the same time, my Kuleana side is kicking in and saying that, why we gotta do these kinds of things when these things was already reserved for us already after listening to Jonathan Scheuer, that we're just like placed in this, what is that, Konani game. Yeah? That's all it's been for us. But now that the state is taking responsibilities, now we can gauge, now we can talk about climate change, now we can figure out, okay, the amount of water that there is, yeah, and how we're going to distribute that water. Now, appurtenant rights, Kuleana rights, filing for our water use permit application. I also filed a water use permit application for Mokohinia Pond. That's pending right now. So listening to the general community saying that the water gotta come back. E ho'i kanani. E ho'i kawai. So that's in the process right now. What's happening up on Mauka? That's a different pickle. Now we gotta look whether or not, okay, all the water that comes from the diversion that comes to my house, it's diverted water. How are we going to adjust pertaining to those things, especially our old Pi'ilani Hawaii systems are no longer operational. What would be the remedy to get the water from point A to point B to my house, yeah, from my taro? It's just madness. But we learn all these kinds of things because kabamamua, the future is in the past. So we got to look at the past in order to figure out what we need today. I found out in a lot of title research that I've done, yeah, maybe lands could have been leased, but the water was always reserved. The water wasn't even a part of the negotiation if somebody was to all of a sudden come in and say, oh, we want to buy your property or we want to lease your property. And only Kuleanas have that right, is what I've learned. Only the Kuleana has that appurtenant rights to go for it, to petition, whichever way they need to petition to make sure I got water for my lo'ikalo. But then there's rules to it. Whatever you subjected to, you got to make sure that the lower landowners are not subjected by anything that you do or I do that may hinder them. Which only tells me that, okay, everything was on Mahele. We got to share our resources. That's not happening right now. The bigger land companies, they're only looking at if you guys ever been to Lahaina, you're going to see the right side of Lahaina is so green, and the left side of Lahaina is so brown. So when we talk about resources and how we're going to manage our town, especially our waterways and all that, the truth never comes, not until the day of the fire. Once that fire was out, all the pumps in the town burnt, all the water came back. All the fish ponds came back. The Hawaii system's water is running now. Everything is back the way it was. But this got to happen in order for us to see the true light of management or mismanagement, and also understanding that the 4 wells that burnt was only for commercial use. None of that water was ever meant for the residents or the general community. So it was mentioned in the last commission meeting, and I hope they heard it, that those wells should be condemned. And if those wells are not used for the residential or community, then sorry. I see everything right now even clearer. That's why I always say, time to push the reset button. And let's get all those things of the past back into place again, because that's where everything was. That's where the playing field, the level playing field was. Right now, we're so boss up. We're so trying to figure out how much for this and how much for that. And so now we have a prime opportunity to do it right. And I only ask that I'm sitting at that table to make sure that things are done right when we push that reset button. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui, Uncle, for taking part in that Konane game and for shedding light really on what's one story, right, in this larger mo'olelo of struggles around Vai in 2023. And so I want to shift to Kaleo as we talk about playing Konane. And Uncle talked a little bit about the tools, like the IFS, which is the minimum amount of water that needs to be in a stream at any given time, which your agency uses. And so as a deputy director of our state's Commission on Water Resource Management, you have the kuleana to oversee the water code that Jonathan so eloquently put together at the beginning. And relatedly, all our water resources throughout the Pai'aina. A heavy kuleana. And so can you talk a little bit about the current challenges that you sort of navigate as a deputy director throughout your tenure, your 2-term tenure as deputy director? And then since you're on Maui, and Uncle mentioned it a little bit, some of the water issues that led to the designation of Maui Komohana in particular.
Okay, that was a really long question, or two of them, or 4 of them. No, mahalo for that, and mahalo, Uncle, for painting that picture. And so I think, for me, just real quick, so Uncle talked about what designated management area, and I think Jonathan talked about it too. So in general, the commission has as a state agency, is responsible for managing and protecting water resources throughout the state, and we do it through permitting primarily and planning. But the 4 permits that we kind of manage are related to wells. So if you're going to dig a well anywhere in the state, you got to get a permit from our commission. Or if you're going to use water from a stream, if you're going to divert water off the stream, or you're going to actually like harden the stream channel itself, you got to get permits from us. Well, in a designated management area, the commission has an additional permit that's required, and that's what we call a water use permit. And so in that process, the commission has this kuleana, and I use that explicitly to ensure that whoever is using water uses it in what we call reasonable and beneficial way. And that's embedded in the water code. And so we have to make sure that you're not wasting water, that the quality of water that you're using it for is tied to the type of use it's used for, that it's not impacting other kuleana users or other public trust uses, as Jonathan mentioned. And so it puts basically the kuleana back on the Water Commission to get involved and kind of administer and kind of be the arbitrator of decision making and who gets what. It's the kind of a modern day konahiki. And so I say that in the context of, when we talk about Vai, and kuleana. Kuleana is the right and responsibility. It's twofold, right? You can use water and you should be able to have access to that. This is your right. But it comes with kuleana, responsibility to that, right? There was always somebody managing vai. And there's, in Nupepa and other cases, there was luna vai, right? That managed these traditional systems. Konohiki that managed the land and vai together in one unique system. And so I see my function as kind of being I don't want to say the modern day konohiki because that's not what I am, but we have a model called kahu vai pono at the commission, right? So we're the stewards of water resources, and what our job is really is to balance current needs with potential future needs, right? To balance protecting vai and being able to use it in a reasonable and beneficial way. And so that kuleana is heavy. It's heavy. And one of the biggest challenges for the commission is, okay, real quick, how many of you guys have heard of the Commission on Water Resource Management? Just raise your hand. Awesome. That's probably half of the room. Before the tension, after the fires, before my tenure at the commission, when I asked that question, maybe 1 out of 10 people raised their hand. And so the lack of awareness and consciousness about the kuleana of the commission and what the commission is and what it's supposed to do was one of the challenges. So now we have an awakened lahui, an awakened community that understands that there is this entity that has this kuleana to make sure that our vai is protected and managed for this generation and the next. So that's one good thing that has come out of it. And I think what Jonathan said is we have to keep up at that advocacy because this is a public trust resource. We all collectively need it. We live because of it. And so that's important. But the other challenge is it's a statewide kuleana. It's all waters of the state. How much staff do you think the Water Commission has?
22.
Not you. He's right. We have 22 staff, 22 throughout the state. And so they're in charge of checking on streams, checking on wells, permitting them. And so we do rely heavily on support and work with the county departments of water supply, who are the public utilities that provide water to a majority of our communities throughout the state. But it's a big kuleana with limited resources. So that's one of the biggest challenges for me, having been at this deputy level. The expectations in the kuleana is so big, yet we as a collective have not, or decision makers, you can say, have not actually resourced where our value set is, right? If we value vai as that which gives us life, then we should put every single penny to that, right? And we shouldn't hesitate to build that muscle, build that organization capacity. And so that's something I've been advocating for. We got new positions, so I'm trying to fill those. But that is one of the challenges. The other challenge is, I would say, data and information, right? And I think with the awareness of our communities today, that you as people in your community can start to collect and kilo and understand, know your vai. There's a panel tomorrow on that, but really know your vai. Like, know where your water comes from, how you use it, right? If you don't have a relationship to it or pilina to it, it's no longer, it's a commodity, right? And so I think that's another challenge, is the apathy, human apathy, that we just wait until we're at the edge of the cliff or hanging off of it to change our behaviors, right? And we've become ma'a to being able to turn on the tap and always going to have water. Well, there's places in Hawaii that may not be the future in the next decade or two. And so now's the time for us to really change our collective behavior, to be more mindful about how we malama vai. And so in the context of designation in Maui Komohana, it is a tool. It's one of many tools the commission has. And I think over the decades, as we were told by community, there were attempts to try to almost reconcile and deal with century worth of historic trauma and injustice, not only to the community, but to vai itself. Disputes that have gone on for generations. We've seen reductions in rainfall and recharge and uses of water that went beyond, again, this natural limit of an ahua or of a moku. And so because of that, the commission decided, instead of waiting to it at the edge of the cliff and hanging off of it, which has historically been the history of this commission, is you wait till almost no more nothing to take action. We proactively recommended designation while we still have some resources to allocate. And then to be mindful about how that remaining water is used in the future. And so currently where we're at is we're reviewing all of the existing water use permits to determine, are the uses reasonable and beneficial? Are these uses that are going to be sustainable in the long term? And then new uses, as people want to use Vai, we will screen that. And as Uncle said, Kuleana tenants will have seats at the table. They'll have an opportunity to advocate and make sure that their uses of Vai are not impacted by those other types of uses. So I think in general on Maui is not short of water issues, as this community is very familiar with, whether it's Nava'i Eha or East Maui or now Maui Komohana. But a lot of that comes down to, as Uncle said, like why do we need to go in as community? Why does community always have to advocate and go out and talk to those that have power or those that have control of Vai, right? And so I see my role, I've seen my role as a deputy, is to bring people together, working through difference, right? Sitting at a table, walking together in a stream to find a common future or a common value set that both people or both groups can work through and live through. It's easier, it's not easy, it's hard, it's difficult, but I really do think that's at the core of our water future, our collective water future, is we really need to put our egos, our hats aside and really do what's best for Vai in the spaces that we as Kanaka take place in.
Mahalo nui, Kaleo. So we've been talking a lot about how values from Wakahiko, right, still are embodied in the process, in law, in management, as konohiki, in our practices. And so I want to sort of shift to Jason, if I can, who in the same vein carries on the legacy of Keli'ipoahi. And so Keas is a large landowner, not only in Hawaii, but in Maui Komohana as well. And I really appreciated Kamehameha's testimony at the last commission meeting, and yours in particular, that highlighted that water resources are inseparable from Aina and a source of life for Aina and Lahui, and that a whole slew of life flows from it. And so could you talk a little bit about how important it is, especially given what Kaleo and Uncle have said, that we jointly manage and work together to manage these resources, and then maybe what that looks like for you and your kulena at Kamehameha?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, water is life. And, you know, that's a common phrase, but when we think about how much we depend upon it, how much everything depends upon it, it's, like Kaleo was saying, it's not in the forefront of everyone's mind. I remember working on the Nava'i Eha case when I worked at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and my job was to kind of document how water flowed, the Kuleana Hawaii systems, where and we would knock on people's doors. You get Kuleana water, and we would try to trace that out. I was the map guy with the technology, but we're in Waikapu, and then it says they get their water from Waihe'e, on the other side of Nava'i Eha, and it really showed how manipulative the plantation system has been. And they're Kuleana water users. It goes through ditches, and the stream is like right next to their house, but yet their water source is coming from 3 ahupua'as away. So, you know, there's been a lot of impact to these systems over times, and we're still kind of coming out of the plantation system. There's still the water systems that have been dilapidated over the last century, and you know, from the late 90s, if until today, you know, we're trying to kind of revamp those systems, make them more efficient, do a lot of those things that will make for a more, being a better kahu to the vai, and making sure we're not wasting water, and we have efficient use of those waters. So, and it comes down to our value sets, right? Like we want to make sure that we're not wasting. We want to make sure we're providing water to kuleana, and then we're using the water for good uses. And for Kamehameha schools, we're really committed to agriculture. We have a large agricultural portfolio and conservation portfolio that is a bulk of our land assets, and we care deeply about our ecosystems, right? We having our forests healthy, and looking at water as those veins that will connect to the different portions of the ahupua'a, and really think about it from an ahupua'a mindset, and that's going to require collaboration with everyone, all landowners, agencies, government, other private landowners, the community especially, right? So, as mentioned, we have large tracts of land above Lahaina, about 1,100 acres, as well as our Paunau, Ahupua'a, where Kahoma Valley is, and that's Kaipo kind of outlined it during his talk, but we are committed to working to better manage the water resources as well as the land, and working with community to do restoration of that aina. And one project that was referenced as well is redoing the pipeline system. When we first got the lands back from a long-term agreement, we are still kind of in that plantation system. So we wanted to, we've been working before the fire and over the last year and a half of really kind of making the system more independent, less dependent upon the supplier of the water, and really still having the diverted water, the same amount of water we've been using for a number of years that supplies water to our agricultural tenants, and also providing an opportunity to provide water to kuleana water users as well. So, those kind of investments into the water systems is necessary to really make those systems more efficient. And also, kind of provide, something positive in terms of agriculture, positive to the economy, and these systems are like all over Hawaii. I don't think there's been enough investment into a lot of these old plantation systems that really need to get modernized, to make sure that we can provide water in the most efficient way, and hopefully provide a more sustainable system from Mauka to Makai. So.
Mahalo. I think it's so helpful. I think everyone thinks water, yes, everyone should have it, right? But there are also these systems that we rely on to transport them, whether it's Kamehameha school systems or plantation systems. And so that's really helpful. And I'm super grateful for your acknowledgement and Kamehameha school's commitment to rethinking what the status quo is. And so I want to, on the note of plantation systems, I want to shift to Jonathan a little bit. We've talked a lot about these plantation systems and their legacies that continue to persist across Hawaii, and to this idea of equity, right? In I think the most illustrative of that is that there have been some recent statements in the media about many things, but by landowners and water purveyors in particular, including about water management and fire. And so can you put these controversial statements into the context of historical challenges of vai in Maui Komohana and what that means for us in this conversation?
Okay. I'm going to assume most people have like vaguely in your mind kind of what has happened since the fires on August 8th, but I want to quickly go over the chronology of some key events before I talk about these recent statements. So August 8th, fires upcountry and in Lahaina. August 9th, the day after, the Board of Land and Natural Resources, the Attorney General for the Board of Land and Natural Resources, files a writ of mandamus in front of the Hawaii Supreme Court. Fancy words, it's an extraordinary legal action where a state entity is going, or somebody is going into the Hawaii Supreme Court and demanding that a state official be forced to do their job. And the attorney says, the official they think is not doing their job is Environmental Court Judge Crabtree, who had said A and B in Mahipono hadn't fully justified the amount of water that they needed for use in central Maui, had ordered some water to return to the streams, and then the state claimed that because of that, Maui County did not have sufficient water to fight fires in central Maui. They filed this full legal brief by the afternoon of the day after the fire. Like, how did you write it that fast? Plus file it. And they specifically claimed this judge had been part of the cause of the risk to the people of Maui. Now, as an aside, a few days later, the County of Maui files a response brief and says, just to be really clear, we had all the water we needed for firefighting in central Maui. August 10th, a very, very strikingly similar accusation is made against the Commission on Water Resources deputy by an employee of West Maui Land Company, saying that a request to have water available for firefighting in West Maui from Kauaula Stream was denied, and we think things might have turned out differently if that had been granted. Never mind that Kauaula Stream is completely disconnected to the county's water system. There were no helicopters flying at 60-mile-an-hour winds, so you couldn't take water from the reservoirs to fight the fires in Lahaina. That gets leaked to the press. Monday, so that's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Monday, the governor of the state of Hawaii goes off script during a press conference and says, you know, you should understand people are fighting against the availability of water for fires. Go look into that. Baits the press. I think 2 days later, Kaleo is redeployed from his position. At the same time, the same day that the letters come from West Maui Land Company, the chair of the Water Commission, who's also the chair of the Board of Land and Natural Resources, first suspends the interim and stream flow standards, that how much water should be in a stream that Uncle Keʻeaumoku talked about fighting for years. They suspend that. The emergency proclamation after the fires, the third emergency proclamation, suspends the water code in West Maui. And then in a separate interview with the media, Governor Green says, in response to a question that we're supposed to roll of designation, he's like, oh yeah, we're going to have to roll that back. September 19th was the first Water Commission meeting after the fires. And, well, at a previous press conference, the demands of Maui Komohana leaders were really clear. There were 4 clear demands. Reinstate the water code, reinstate the in-stream flow standards, protect designation, reinstate Kaleo. Amazingly, because of the incredible leadership of Maui Komohana around water issues, 3 of the 4 had happened by September 19th. The governor backed off from statements about revoking designation. In-stream flow standards were put back into place. The emergency order was changed to not suspend the water code, which only left one thing: which was clearly demanded for. And folks were really clear, hey, Commission, your next meeting is going to be on Maui in October. and you better make it a celebration, because if it's not a celebration, it's going to be something else. And luckily, we were celebrating, and he received a resounding, long set of applause, the reinstatement of Kaleo Manuel as the deputy. So 4 for 4, right? But we still have things to do. And so the question that Uilani Tanigawa alum said was, in an article in the Washington Post, the owner of West Maui land, Peter Martin, said that essentially, and remember that statement about our Native Hawaiian investigators of the famine in Lahaina in 1867, they point to say it's not God's will that caused this famine, but the thoughtfulness of men. So Peter Martin says in this quote to Washington Post a week or so after the fire, that he thought God was angry. And then unbelievably, he doubles down on October 30th, 2.5 weeks ago, the New Yorker magazine has an interview with him as part of an overall story on fires. And I'll just read you the entire paragraph. And kalamai kids, there's some swear words in here, but they're not mine. Peter Martin, West Maui Land Company's co-founder and CEO, told me that protecting water for Native Hawaiian cultural practices was, quote, a crock of shit, end quote. And that invasive grass and, quote, this stupid climate change thing, end quote, had, quote, nothing to do with the fire, end quote. He felt unfairly demonized by activists. Quote, they're trying to paint this picture that I'm a colonialist, end quote. The real problem, he said, was that the Water Commission and its code, which was so overbearing that it prevented him from replacing dry grassland with irrigated landscape parcels or even small hobby farms. Maui's lands, he added, quote, were not being used as God intended, end quote. So it's like mixed emotions, right? It's kind of funny. I'm like, oh, bro, uncle, we don't say those things aloud anymore, But it's also like just horrifying, and particularly in a historic grounding of you realize, what were the arguments even made to create private property in Hawaii? It was in the context of depopulation of the Hawaiian people. There was these arguments that were made by the missionaries to the government that said, if you actually create private property, this will give people the incentive to thrive and survive. Never mind a microbial theory of disease that didn't exist yet, but right, this was what was happening. And so the historic impact of these quotes in the context of these quotes is that, right, if it's not clear, the battle for the control of water is the battle for the control of Hawaii and for the future of Hawaiians in Hawaii. So when I say in my opening remarks, we've got to continue and follow the leadership of the people of Maui Komohana, who've stood up for the code, who've stood up for the public trust, who've made it clear, and in the English translations of the Olelo Hawaii that was used by one of the youngest testifiers as they appeared before the Water Commission, she said, we're not here to ask, we are here to demand. So that's where we're at, folks. We're on a precipice. East Maui, West Maui, across the Pai'aina.
Mahalo nui. And on that note, I want to sort of shift us to thinking about looking forward to an abundant future. That's what we're up against, despite having really strong protections in our law and having continuing to rely on many of the practices that have sustained life on these islands since time immemorial. We continue to sort of battle up against that sort of rhetoric. And so I think it's going to be hard to disrupt status quo and radically reimagine how we manage and transport water. And so because I want to make sure that we have time to get to Q&A from our audience here, I want to leave us with this last question. And so one of my favorite quotes from Julian Agon is that part of our job as attorneys, but generally is to dream. And so part of our job is to imagine a future, to dream about what's possible. And so I want to ask you all, what does abundance in 2023 and ahead look like? And how do we get there, and how do we support your efforts in your respective kuleana as we all play this konane game? I realize that was 4 questions, so kalamai and mahalo.
You know, I think right now the position Lahaina is in, man, basically what we were worrying about, Komohana, was when we were going to start kicking in some way of supporting Kaleo Manuel, because he has a lot of water use permit applications to review. Now that everything kind of evolved better for all of us, I don't know whether or not it's a good thing for you or not such a good thing for you. But it is what it is. And I think when we look at abundance, when I talked about that research button, there's over 2,000 plus homes are devastated. So we're, you know, I'm kind of, we run a hub in Lahaina at the Sheraton Hotel. We've been feeding families from August 11th. At the same time, I'm running the cultural monitors in town, making sure that I know everything that's happening, especially when it comes to the water, especially when it comes to our infrastructure is like gone. So is everybody, all those 2,000 plus homes are going to be subjected to a water use permit application also? These are kind of things that run into my mind, because I think our infrastructure is like done. And what's going to be the process to make sure that we find that abundantness. So when I talked about condemning all those wells that was only meant for commercial businesses, that's a step in the right direction. To make sure that our people that are now faced with this devastation has possibilities of regrowth by looking at that reset button, by looking at making sure that the priorities for the people that lost their homes in town, that should be the #1 priority, how we can get water back to their homes. We're worrying about other things when they start doing the initial cleanup and they start cleaning up that whole place. How is that going to work? So we all got to kick in, all of us. We all got to understand the problems that'll come, and hopefully we all can, in a combined effort, try to find solutions together, because if not, you know, they're already gauging this thing that if anything does ever come back, we're looking at a time window of 2028. That's a reality we got to look at. That's a reality that I see every day. I'm in the burn site every day. And I see all these things coming back. We just got to figure out how we're going to put those things to make sure it's for our benefit. All these other conglomerates that came from wherever, put them on a waiting table like how we've been waiting for all these years. Put them on a side saddle. Because right now, the biggest problem is how we're going to get water to the family that lost their homes. I'm willing to, even though if my water use permit application has been waiting on the desk for I don't know how many years, I can wait a whole bunch of years maintain that our town can be rebuilt again. So when we talk about abundantness, we got to talk about everybody's way on how we can all be involved and how we can get our town back. I think it starts from there. Ola Kauai.
Okay, I'll keep it quick so we can ask questions. I see abundance in 2023 and on, where the commission is just the very end of the tube. So I'm a planner by training, so I'm a process person and systems person, and so the system right now doesn't work, right? And we really need to focus on fixing the system or creating a new one. And that's what abundance looks like to me. And it's a system created by people or by the community, for the community. And we as government support the community in the implementation of that system. And so I think we've gotten really far away from what that looks like. But when I say community, it's a community based on equity and leaning into this historic trauma and the inequities that have existed and correcting that. Because if we cannot do that, we'll never be whole as a community. And without being whole, there's no such thing as abundance, right? Somebody is losing something. And I think we really can, as an island people, as Kanaka Maoli and being pili to this aina, we have to be whole in order for abundance to occur. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, for me, thinking about abundance today, 2023 and beyond, kind of on the short run, I think a lot about Lahaina, although I'm not on the island, but like as a role as a private landowner, have the legacy of Keʻeaumoku and our legacy lands there. We had some stuff in the pipeline. I think Kapu was talking about it, and so we're rightfully so kind of patiently waiting for the right time. And the abundance I kind of visualize is just getting kind of like what Kapu was saying, getting people and planting and restoring the lands as maybe a process of healing and abundance. But then I also kind of project that out to other parts of the Pai'aina. I think the events over the last few months have really prioritized various things of just restoring lands. Restoring lands is a great land management practice. It's a great community building opportunity to really create more Aina Momona and have all these just kind of like a movement towards restoring our Aina and that will then lead us to the pono management of all of our resources, water, our forests, our cultural sites and practices as well. So that's kind of the abundance I see in my mind.
I kakao the remarks of Keʻeaumoku, Kaleo, and Jason. I guess the only thing I would say is if what I'm prompted to share is you can't talk about observing abundance outside without talking about contentment within, right? So what we reserve or see as abundance depends upon partially what we're content with. And so some of the hard question is, how shall we live in these islands? In what manner? And then also, when we find that as a people, what we're content with, then also asking those who need things, who do not have enough to be content with, that they be provided. And then beyond that, that those who might wish to join us in living in these amazing islands, that they don't bring their level of expectations with them, but they conform to our understanding of what it means to be content and abundant in this place.
Mahalo nui. Our questions are starting to roll in, but I just wanted to follow up and ask, given the many hats that all of you here on the stage wear, could you share a little bit on how, the broader lehu or the public can support you or in your respective roles or support getting us to those visions of abundance, to making that a reality? So what are some of those actionable ways that we can kako'o?
I'll start this end, and then we'll go backwards. So I consult for the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. 200,000 acres of land, which through the success and yet compromises of Jonakuhio Kalanianaole dealing with elites in Washington and elites here are largely dry and remote. If we want to talk about housing for Hawaii's people, the only legal housing we can have that legally guarantees that is to people with ties to this island are DHHL. The biggest barrier I've concluded after a dozen years working on it is VI. So whether you are a beneficiary or just somebody who kako'o the beneficiaries, please help us get water for DHHL lands, because it's ultimately the only way to fulfill that promise that all of the people of Hawaii took in accepting statehood in 1959.
I can go. You know, I really think about like who manages water. You know, we have a few people with agencies and so forth, but do we have the next generation really in the pipeline to manage water for you know, private landowners, state, county, and others, and even kind of help with just general community water issues. But we have probably, just like the infrastructure and aging out of people that have been doing it, the old plantation and ranch workers over the years. There are, I think, some really great Kanaka that have taken on kind of water management jobs and careers, but I think we really, Kaleo and I always talk about this, really, how can we build that pipeline to get the next generation of these water managers or stewards or purveyors or operators of systems into the workforce and help us kind of lead maybe not maybe, but a more efficient future of how we manage our water. So.
Possibilities for me, you know, it's been evident that, you know, now, before when we used to advocate for everything in a county, state, wherever, we're the minority in there. Now I see a resurgence of our younger generation stepping to the plate. This last Water Commission meeting on Maui was very explosive because of a lot of the kamali'i from Kulakaio Punio Lahaina, from the Punana programs, even in the high school level, the intermediate level, huri akamai. Because they really, really understand vai. And we got to credit our kumu because they're leading our next generations in the right direction. So they kind of woke me up because all these years of advocating what we needed to just to have a seat at the table, I think that's a good lesson we learned, that the younger generation is ready and they're ready to do what they need to do to make sure that we can hang up our hat and rest easy. I'm just hoping that, you know, more and more emphasis goes to the younger generation. We got to start paying attention to them. Because, you know, me as a father, I have three sons and a daughter, and I haven't been paying too much attention to them. But from them, they gave me 16 grandchildren and one more coming. And all of them, well, I would say a dozen of them are in Kulakaio Puni and Punanaleo. And I know that they'll be educated in the direction that we need to go, because if not, then I'll be a pain on their side, reminding them about what they need to do. But I know I'm confident that they are going up that right direction. So we have hope for the future generations for tomorrow. So mahalo.
Yeah, kako'o. I think that's exactly it. And then I think maybe how the rest of us as the lehulehu can kako is, again, vote and get the leaders that you want that have the value set that you kako'o into office and into decision-making spaces. We need alaka'i that have that opuali'i that we talk about or yearn for. And we owe it to that generation, those keiki kaiopuni, to be alaka'i for them. So that way, when they get into the spaces that we're in now, it's a little less kaumaha for them to have to deal with. So that's just my thing. Engage, participate. We shouldn't come out to meetings just when get pilikia. Come out to meetings because you just like be aware and engage. Like we oftentimes have to round up the troops when you want to take a stand against something, but let's take a stand for something and participate, right? In every step of that process. And that's on us, each and every one of us to do that. So that's my kahea to all of you to help me and others that are in spaces that like this. It helps when we have and are held accountable and are held to you as a public, right? I'm a public servant, and it's for the lahui. So mahalo.
Mahalo nui. So I'm going to sort of merge two of the questions that came in. There's a question that could become a dissertation around how West Maui Land Company got some of these, got a hold of these systems and are in control. And there are also questions about discussions around tourism, the tourism industry and their impact on water resources. And so has tourism sort of taken the place of these plantation industries? And so you're welcome to answer any part of that. Maybe if you could share some of the landscape of who those corporations are and some of the larger entities and whether that's tourism. We can junk in po or voluntold. No.
You can start.
There's like 15 dissertations in there. Okay. Struggling here. So West Maui Land Company, made up of Peter Martin and other investors, acquired most of the lands of Pioneer Mill. Pioneer Mill itself, its own corporate history was that it was originally founded in the 1860s. In the 1870s was taken over by one of the 5 sugar factors, the Big 5, Hackfield and Company, which then during World War I, as a German-owned firm, the assets were seized by the U.S. government by a federal agency, and then divided among essentially the other Big 5. So it became American Factors. When American Factors went out of business, it did bulk land sales, and so that's what created what is now this interlocking set of companies: West Maui Land Company, Oluwalu Water Company, Launeopoko Irrigation Company, Launeopoko Water Company, Makila Land, and probably a couple others. So. Other than what they've sold off, they've controlled these. I was asked the other day why, after the plantations closed, weren't these streams restored? Right? No use. And the only answer I have is, the two-part answer is, one is the commission should have held it as their responsibility but didn't take advantage of that moment. And the only places around the islands where post-plantation closure that in-stream flow standards were immediately changed to allow for more Mauka and Makai flow were when communities came together and petitioned the Water Commission to do so. So in Waiahole, Waikane, on Oahu, Navai'eha over here, Huio Navai'eha, and others. So I guess I'll just say in my last response to this question, right? Part of the problem is when we look at Hawaii's landscape and our waterscape, the plantation's still here, right? The plantation's gone on the landscape, but we still think of the world in terms of the plantation system that we grew up in, and not just in terms of sometimes overly trusting those in authority to make the right decisions, but that would benefit everybody, but also I mean, even in terms of when we talk about like protecting agricultural lands and the agricultural lands of Hawaii, we think about the historic footprint of the plantations and ranches, which was the tax incentives and land ownership and labor incentives were in place to farm every square inch, ridge to ridge, right? And those, particularly in a warming world, in a world where we want sustainable food systems and diverse things, that's not the same footprint anymore that we want. We probably want to radically expand the footprint of our forests and narrow the footprint of actively farmed lands to something that is much more sustainable, that fits what Hawaii is really well suited and from cultural basis designed to support. I don't know if that's fully responsive to the questions, but.
Yes, mahalo nui. And
Yeah, I'll take a stab real quick. So I think, I look at, I'm an assets-based planner, so I'm looking at the inverse of the question. So, if tourism, what I'm reading between the lines is tourism taking place of plantation and tourism being bad, or having an effect on our water resources. That's my assumption based on the question. But what I challenge us to do is, instead of, again, fighting against the things that we don't want to see, what is it that we do want to see in terms of use of our vai? And elevating that in every single dialogue and discourse that we have, right? Do we want to continue to see landscape, so I'll say it, so wailea, right? This purely manufactured green landscape, or do we want to see, edible food systems within that landscape, right? We should be starting to articulate, and it's a policy and a value set, right? You can change policy. Well, let's say, okay, instead of having grass, let's plant food in every single place that we have grass. Is that what we want to use water for? That's what we should be advocating for, while also simultaneously challenging the existing system and status quo. So it's not a direct question answer, but I think that's what came to mind when the question came up. And similarly, oftentimes plantation was the economy of Hawaii. Now tourism and military are the other two, right? And so our communities have become reliant on these economic systems that oftentimes are very extractive and not reciprocal in any way, except for the economy. And so how do we get into, as Kamana Deviner says, like this circular economy? What do we want to see happen here in Hawaii? And how do we shift and change those policies to support that future vision?
Can I ask a short question? How do I get more water to Don Hawaii on the Kapuna side of Waikiki Street? My grandfather's mowing until a few years ago, until the hurricane that threw the Yao Street. And so there's not enough water. The guys who take care of the permitting was Maui Poi. And I just thinking, they asking me, is there water? My knee's bad, the whole Hawaii doesn't go all the way anymore. But when I was a kid, they dammed the stream, right? They got a pipe going to it. I don't get one. We got a fly again.
So I can restate for everyone who couldn't hear. Uncle is asking in Waihe'e, how does he get more water to your lo'i that was historically there? And that sort of, I want to just mesh it a little bit with one of the questions that we had come in. I promise they're not looking at my text, they're looking at the questions. Where did it go? Okay, so relatedly, one of the questions is, what are some effective ways that the public can advocate for water and Lahaina's water to be reserved for the purposes that Uncle's talking about, like lo'i kalo? So how do we get water back to some of those public trust purposes that Jonathan talked about?
So the short answer to getting access to water, so if you currently aren't getting water, come talk to me and we can figure out the site-specific situation. But in general, if you're going to use water off of a stream or divert water, you got to get a stream diversion permit from the commission. And that's really just in a way for us to track this water budget that we talk about. So that way we know who's taking at what places. So that way if you, for example, you're downstream and it's dry, we can go back upstream to see, okay, who's pulling off the stream and is it affecting you, to make sure that there is connectivity or there's access to that water resource. So that's a more specific question. I guess related to Lahaina, the framework is a water management area. So applying for water use permits, traditionally there were hui, right, that used to manage a lot of these systems. And I think that's a great strategy for community in reviving kind of this concept of hui, where instead of you as an individual with my right to farm my aina, applying for your needs, what does your hui, what does your ahupua'a, what does your community need, and collectively advocating for the return of that water and how that water is going to be managed from Mauka to Makai. So you don't have these issues where I know more water, you should know already who's upstream that's managing water upstream of you. So you guys can have that communication, that have that pilina, have that relationship, so that way you know how to manage the system, Mauka to Makai. Or at least that's a strategy. It's one of many strategies that can be employed, but that's just a suggestion. It's something that I think the commission highlighted in its latest decisions in the Navai Eha contested case hearing, which is currently on appeal. So we'll see if that 7 and 9 becomes 8 and 10, or 7 and 10. But yeah, that's maybe a strategy to advocate for water for those types of uses within community.
Mahalo nui. Yeah, so it sounds like there are individuals can go to the commission, and maybe even you, Kaleo, to sort of address some of the specific issues that they see in their community. But there are these larger questions too, right, about how do we advocate for Lahaina's water to be used in the way that its kupa are calling for. And so, Uncle, maybe do you have anything to add about how we can kako'o to make sure that the water is used in the way that you folks are saying are important?
I'm going to jump to his last comment, talking about, basically what would happen when we were responsible of managing our oil system. Then all of a sudden, things drastically changed. I used to say this a lot, that Pioneer Mill gave birth to the dragon with 7 heads. And that's Launeopoko, Olawalu, Kahoma, Kawaula, Makila, Mahanalua Nui, and what was the other one? Ukumihame. Yeah. Dragon with 7 heads. And I think that's where everything stemmed from, on how all of a sudden they took management of a resource that was unclear. And why I say that is because all of us who have kuleana through the Land Commission Award Royal Patent, you still have that right to advocate. Now, if you don't pick up that right to advocate against this so-called individual that just came in and bought into something which he thought that was all his rights to do whatever he wanted to, then I think a lot of our problems exist right there, and if we don't do anything about it, then nothing's going to change. So when we start looking at how are we going to MacGyver ourselves into the positive direction, I hear the younger generation, they talk about, what is that word? Settler colonialism. That's new kind of stuff to me when you talk about that, settler colonialism. What is that? You're like, we've been educated in a system, that we got to be compliant to, and there's no other way we can go, because if we do go against the system, then we'll be subjected, under the poverty line as Kanaka. So, by addressing, okay, where this monster came from, where the boogeyman came from, and how we're going to eradicate this boogeyman, by getting rid of that settler colonialism within ourselves. And that's why I always say that the next generation is going to be the key for us. Because they're akamai. They're going to do whatever it needs to do. And I always kind of talk about this one kupuna, and he's sitting right in front of me, and he's ready to raise his hand. But before he does, he used to tell me that. He used to tell us that we've been eating from the buffet of the world and neglect the plate of our kupuna. And that stuck to me. That stuck to me, and I still live by that code, that we got to start ma'ona the things that we ma'atu. Even if it's ai or aina. or vai. We gotta bring those values back. We gotta bring those things back. We gotta educate our next generations to be advocates because of those things. If not, then man, we're running one hub in Lahaina. I don't know how long that's gonna take so we can service our community, the multitudes. We're feeding 1,000 to 1,500 people a day. And by doing that, gives us an opportunity to know that, okay, this is working, this isn't working. How do we more push the envelope to make sure that the government does their job? How do we make sure that everybody knows and can feel comfortable that we are going in a direction that will benefit everybody and not just a few? These conglomerates that came to our land, these aliens that came to our land, they're taking too much. They're taking way too much. So with the help of everybody and showing up with our Water Use Commission, that's the route we gotta go. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui. I'm mindful of our time and the many wonderful panels that we have planned for the rest of the day. And so I want to mahalo each of you for your time today, for your aloha, but more so for the many kuleana that you awamo in each of your respective roles. And I acknowledge and I'm grateful for all the aloha that you pour into it and the effects that it'll have for our aina and for our future generations. And so I'm so grateful. And I want to ask our audience to please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists for our time together today. Mahalo.